Hello, and excuse me, I was in conversation with our panelists. Welcome everyone to the EO Equals webinar, Selling Your Business, the Many Benefits of Employee Ownership. Thank you for tuning in today. My name is Shelley Miller, and I'm the Director of New Ownership Opportunities and Outreach at the ICA Group, a leading expert on worker ownership and the oldest national organization dedicated to the development of worker cooperatives. Today's conversation is with two founders who transitioned their businesses to employee ownership, specifically to worker cooperatives. I'll introduce our speakers in a moment. At the end of our conversation, we'll have a Q&A session, so please submit your questions throughout the program using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. When you submit a question, please include your name and where you're from. And if you're a small business owner, we'd love to hear the name of your business and where it's located. And if you miss anything, don't worry. We'll be sending around the recording when it's available. My organization, the ICA Group, is one of four nonprofit partners leading the EO Equals campaign, along with Evergreen Cooperatives, Nexus Community Partners, and Project Equity. With support from the Candida Fund, our organizations came together to expand the employee ownership, or EO movement, helping more small businesses thrive, empowering workers with higher quality jobs, and building more equitable communities. Employee ownership can take a few different forms, but it's always a business model in which the employees have an equity stake in the business, making them full or part-time owners. It's beneficial to the businesses, the employees, and the community. From increasing profit margins to building equity and being a secure exit opportunity, EO is a great business decision. I can't think of a better way to illustrate these benefits than hearing from our speakers today. Sarah Durham is an entrepreneur and creative consultant with a passion for helping nonprofits communicate more effectively so they can advance their missions. She founded Big Duck in 1994 to help nonprofits increase their visibility, raise money, and communicate more effectively. 28 years later, Sarah was ready to move on to her next business venture. Rather than selling to the highest bidder or closing up shop, Sarah sold Big Duck to its employees and transitioned the business into a worker cooperative. Michael Skolnik also founded a Brooklyn-based creative agency, which is also now an employee-owned worker cooperative. Michael is a founding partner of the Soze Agency, a creative agency that works with companies, nonprofits, organizations, and movements to create campaigns rooted in compassion, authenticity, and equity. Michael and his fellow co-founders were drawn to employee ownership as a way to build a triple P bottom line company with equity at the center of both their internal and external practices. Sarah and Michael, thank you for joining us. And if you're ready, I'm going to jump in to some questions that we hope will enlighten our participants today. So you each had different reasons for choosing employee ownership. What other options did you consider to achieve your business goals? And how did you compare them with EO? And what made you finally choose EO? So I'll throw that first to you, Sarah. If you want me to break it down, I can. If you have those three together, you can address them.
Well, I'll take a shot at it. And Shelley, if I miss anything, feel free to poke at me about it. So I have so with Big Duck, I had a goal of exiting the business for the last 10 years I was in it. And I had been talking to some of my employees over the years about all the different ways I might exit. And I had thought about selling it to other agencies, selling it privately to a couple of employees, a number of different things. Um, One of the reasons employee ownership became so important for us was that it was actually a really affordable way for my employees to purchase the business and to do so in a very grounded in equity way. It wasn't just one or two special employees who could afford
Mhm.
it. It was everybody, regardless of their financial means. And so that was very compelling. I think it's also worth noting that I about 4 or 5 years ago, I actually acquired a second agency, and I was running a second agency, and I sold that agency too, not to the employees. I sold that agency to another agency. So I've had the experience of selling one business to my employees and one business to other agencies, and they're both good options. But from a values alignment point of view, I think it's pretty hard to beat selling to your employees.
Wonderful. And Michael, how about you? You want me to repeat the questions or you
No,
got
I'm
it?
good. Thank you. And Sarah, thank you for that. Pleasure to be here and awesome to see so many people here interested in employee-owned companies. Um, I was involved in the sale of a company in 2015 of a previous company I was the president of. And after the sale of that company, um, founded this company with a group of, or co-founder with a group of a few other people. And really, in the very, very beginning of the founding of the company, we were exploring economic models that would center equity in the middle of it, from an internal purpose and not just from an external purpose. I met with a lot of people, a lot of really smart people. Everyone said just become a B Corp. And I remember my child was probably 3, and we used Tom's toothpaste. And remember, there's a B on the back of that, so I knew kind of what a B Corp was. And I thought I think B Corps are great. I haven't, I think they're great. I just felt for us, we didn't need like a stamp of approval that we're good humans and that we're going to do good to the world. And I thought that we can go beyond that. I was giving a talk at an event, and someone said, I'd love to talk to you about your business. Have you ever thought of becoming a worker-owned company? I'd never heard of it. I don't know what that is, but it sounds like I'd be very interested in that idea. And over the course of many, many years, we sort of worked towards building that and building a culture of that internally. COVID was sort of in the middle of that and was somewhat problematic, and just getting through the final hurdles, the final steps, because we obviously were just trying to survive as a company and not thinking. So the transition happened actually about a year and some change ago in the middle of COVID. We were hoping to do it earlier in 2019, but we put it on pause because of COVID. And officially, I signed over the company in July of 2020. So I love it. I know very little about it, so I probably
Mhm.
should be in the attendee section of this conversation. So I'm learning, and I'm a big fan of Big Duck. So Sarah, I really admire your company and what you have done. I've watched it from a distance. I don't know you all personally, but I've watched what you've done and built, and I'm happy that we as creative agencies um, are part of this new collective of companies that share the same values.
And Michael, I'm going to have you address this next question first, and then Sarah, just because you both already touched on it a bit. And the question is, how does employee ownership relate to your values and your mission?
Yeah, I just came from an event 10 minutes ago where we were discussing, dreaming, and imagining what new economic systems could be put into place to sort of um, at some point slow down the process of what's happening in the world and the economic models that have been persistent for centuries. Um, I just wanted us to reimagine what capitalism in a for-profit company could look like inside a capitalistic system. Um, so profit is certainly a bottom line for us. We're a for-profit business, but people had to come first, and not just our people, like people. Like we don't want to create more harm in anything that we do, in the work that we do, and internally, externally. We don't want to contribute to any more harm in the world, and certainly then the planet comes second, and probably a close second. So we just felt that we had to build systems that put people first and not profit first. And if people felt good about what they were doing, that profit would come. And so we center people and the planet as our first two priorities. And hopefully that will build a healthy company and a company rooted in values of compassion as our sort of core value. That will then create profit so people can maintain their jobs and pay their bills and take care of their families. So yeah, people is really, really important. I think an employee-owned company allows for that, where um, an investor-driven company or a public company, oftentimes your stakeholders are just not the people who are most impacted.
Gotcha. And Sarah?
I echo everything Michael said. I think that's really well put. I want to go back and raise up something he said actually at the beginning too, about centering internally versus externally. Like the B Corp status, which is great, is very external. It's sort of a marker you wear as a business. But employee ownership centers on the employees as a key unifying force. And one of the things that I felt increasingly over my time at Big Duck was that, I started the business in my 20s, and as a woman starting a business in my 20s, I experienced a fair amount of sexism and discrimination. And as I got older, that started to shift. And at a certain point, as I was in my late 40s, I realized that I held a lot of power, and that, I was talking a lot about giving other people a seat at the table and being more equitable and being more inclusive and being anti-racist, but yet I held all the power in this company. And so from a values alignment point of view, I think one of the benefits of employee ownership that we should talk about more is the redistribution of power, grounded in the idea that everybody in the company is important, which isn't to say that a co-op doesn't have hierarchy, and there is still a management structure, there is still hierarchy, but that it really puts a lot more power and agency in the hands of the member owners. And I think that was very motivating for my employees, and is motivating for me as a way to demonstrate my values, that I was actually willing to step back in order for other people to step forward.
Wonderful. Okay, so whichever one of you would like to tackle this question first, I think this is a really important question for our participants. What preparation should a business owner do to ready the business for a successful transition to employee ownership? Who wants to jump right in?
Happy to jump in. So our model is maybe a little bit different than others. We don't have a buy-in for ownership, and anyone can become an owner after being there for 2 years. So we have a lot of younger staff, and I also am in my 40s and have been working since I was a child. So I've had many jobs. And I think for younger staff members who maybe their first job or their second job to then become an owner of a company, I think one mistake that we made, and we discuss this later, of things that I've done differently, is just preparing the company for a culture of ownership. And for me, the culture of ownership is really about decision making, who makes decisions on powerful, important things that impact the company. And so beginning to build a level of transparency and decision making power to younger staff, so they can understand that they own it, they own the decision, and a decision that they make will have an impact on the entire company. I wish we'd done more of that as we transitioned. We've done more sort of training around what ownership really means, because that first class of owners, it was a tough first year, because we had to do a lot more integration of what it is just to be an owner of a company, not just in an employee-owned company, but an owner in any company, when most of our staff have never owned a company before. Having owned a company before, I understood some of the responsibilities, but I think we could have done a better job at that. So I would say in that transition, work through what ownership looks like and model
Right,
that, and then also trainings for that.
right. Because, we're really not trained to be entrepreneurs, right? We're kind of trained to be employees in our own mind. So, Sarah, what
Yeah.
would you say?
Well, I think
To that
Michael's
question?
point is very well made. Big Duck is still in its first year of employee ownership, and it is still, and everything he talked about is certainly true. It's a lot of learning curve for people about what it means to be an employee owner. Um, Shelley, your question about what prep should you do makes me think of the process a little bit in stages. And the two things that, or three things that we did way before the process was we talked to other companies we talked to companies we knew that had become ESOPs, companies that had become co-ops. We kind of, talked to some people. I was already having an active conversation with a couple of people on my team. We didn't open up that this was a conversation we were having to everybody yet because we didn't want to get everybody going down a path either of worrying or getting excited about something until it was a bit real. So we were mostly having sort of quiet conversations amongst ourselves, learning from other people. And then I have to say, one of the most useful parts, preparatory steps for us was we found out that New York State has this incentive and that we could work with consultants and it would be paid for through this grant. And so we started interviewing consultants who could help us with the process. And that's when we found ICA Group, who helped us with our transition. And that was hugely valuable. And I would definitely encourage the attendees on this, if you're thinking about employee ownership, to talk to Shelley. Shelley was the first person we spoke to, was super helpful. And so we ended up choosing to work with ICA, and they continue to be a really, really helpful partner in the process. I guess the last piece I want to underscore, though, is that I think this may be different for Michael because I think you're still you're still a part of the co-op. I was exiting. But I think another piece that is important is some kind of coaching or support for people who are stepping into new roles or stepping out in the process, which maybe is a flavor of what Michael said earlier too. But for me, there were, as an owner who wanted to exit, there were steps, there were parts in the process that felt really fun and easy, and parts in the process felt really difficult and painful. And I now work as a coach, and I coach a lot of small business owners, and I've worked with other coaches, and I wish I had had a good coach at the time because I could have used a separate space to kind of process my own thinking and feelings about it. So that's something I would encourage people to think about.
Wonderful. Okay, so Michael, how have you seen employee ownership benefit your business? And are there any unexpected benefits?
Sorry, I'm just trying to charge my headphone as we chat. Uh, yeah, I see a tremendous amount of benefit. As Sarah mentioned in her career, as I can't pretend to understand as a white man, cisgendered man, I have not experienced the many things in business that women or people of color or LGBTQ people have experienced. And so part of the, not just in business, but in life, I don't want to, belittle the experiences to just what happens in business, it happens outside of business as well. So part of the exercise of becoming employee owned was to also create a company that people of color, women, and LGBTQ people could own. And I think, Shelley, to your point about not becoming entrepreneurs, we could discuss this another time, but we all know, right, the numbers of the access to capital and investment that people of color, women have compared to white men, the lack of the amount of mediocrity in white men and who are fail upwards compared to people who have to fight and fight and fight just to get, an employee, become an employee. So I wanted to create a business that was multiracial and multi-gendered and had, a very diverse group of owners, and that has happened. We're 80+% women and as a company, and we're, I think, 75, 80+% people of color, and it's been, to build a multiracial democracy, as we see in this country, has been very challenging,
Hmm.
to say the least.
Hmm.
So the multiracial business or multi-gendered business is also very challenging, but
Hmm.
incredibly rewarding, and we're committed to it. And so to see a young person who might be the first time as an owner of a business, the first time who was thought they're going to go up a different ladder in the corporate world, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm 26 and I now call myself an owner, is awesome. Is
Hmm.
really really amazing to see, and also to like work with that person as my partner
Hmm.
is really rewarding. So we certainly have um, challenged what the playing field looks like, and I think we all internally have to work through that every single day. But um, to have transparency on finances, I can't tell you coming up in this world how many times I question how much that person get paid. Like, what do they? What? Who signed that check? And now we have a full salary matrix where everyone can see you know ranges of salaries and where everyone what range everyone's in, and there's no hard questions asked because everybody knows from the person that got a new job, the person's been there the longest. So that level of transparency is transformational
Yeah.
in how we operate, and not easy, but
Hmm.
it's incredibly joyful to every day wake up and challenge a system that we thought was just the inevitable.
Hmm. I imagine the participants are probably wondering a lot about that. And Sarah, I see your hand up.
Yeah,
So,
I just want to elaborate on something that Michael talked about because I think you made a lot of great points there, and I want to sort of name the fact that like actually those are all things you can do without becoming employee owned, right? Like you can certainly do all those things, and we at Big Duck had a lot of those things in place, but the difference is at the end of the day who really holds power. And, so if you were running a privately held company where there isn't, one or two owners and they choose to do all the things that Michael talked about, that's great. But at the end of the day, the profit is probably going in their pockets and they have the ability to revoke those policies or change those policies. So to me, one of the things that's very powerful about employee ownership is that it is a way that that if you value equity the way we're talking about it today, you can really put your money where your mouth is. That you've got real skin in the game in this in a way that and we just saw this week, Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia coming up with a brand new way to he's giving his business away to the earth. I don't know if everybody saw this announcement, but it sort of rocked the business world as this new model. I mean, a lot of people espouse values of centering on equity or the environment or the different things. Not a lot of people actually take action to to advance that, and I think that's really powerful.
yeah. And I just want to expand on because I don't know that it's coming out as clearly as it should. But Michael also touched on that idea of democracy. We probably spend most of our lives, at work where decisions, are made, and most of us don't have any input into those decisions. And the thing about employee ownership is that it democratizes the workplace so that the employees, the workers, that's why we call them workers usually instead of employees, have that kind of decision making power. And which tends to translate into so many things beyond the workplace. People become more involved in their community. They become more involved in the democracy. They become more involved in so many things. So it does have that impact. And that leads me to this question, Sarah, for you. It is often said that EO can achieve both your financial and non-financial goals. So, the financial is to pay you like the market rate value of your business. But non-financial goals can vary and everybody has their own. Can you give an example of a non-financial goal that EO helped you to achieve that a traditional sale to a third party could not have helped you achieve?
Yeah, I think this is to some extent both a financial and a non-financial goal. But for one of the things I was most proud of at Big Duck and continue to be proud of is the people. We built this really exciting team of people, and and this is a process. Going to employee ownership allowed people to become the owners of the company regardless of their financial capacity to buy in. So um, that's actually for me was a non-financial benefit of this. Getting to see people run the company and own the company free and clear of me, um, regardless of their ability to buy in. And I think that's pretty transformative. I mean, my company, if I had sold it to many other people, it would have been really hard to align the values of our team with the values of another agency. This was just a unique petri dish of people, and so that was I think a real non-financial benefit.
Great. And let me just say this because I realize it's important for our participants to understand, and we shouldn't assume that you know. Sarah has alluded to this a couple of times. In a transition to employee ownership, what happens is you look at your labor force, right? The people who work for you, and a realistic purchase price for a membership share is determined, and that's separate from the enterprise value of the business. Evaluation is done, and this is basically a leverage buyout. There are special financial institutions that help to finance these deals so that the owner can get a reasonable price. But the employees are not asked to, each of you come up with $25,000. They may come up with as little as $100 a share, or in Michael's case, when he did no dollars a share. But that membership certificate that you get gives you the right one share, one vote. So unlike a stock share where you can buy 1,000 and then you vote 1,000, you buy one. So that's what Sarah's alluding to. And I do want to give the audience a chance to jump in with any questions. But Sarah, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, Shelley, your comments, make me think about how one of the things that's challenging in this process is that if you're on this webinar today, it's because you're curious about it and you're trying to learn more. And it is not a process that you see a lot of businesses go through. So there are a lot of questions. And one of the reasons we found our work with ICA Group so helpful is that the first step of the process was a feasibility process in which the business was valued, in which its operational viability was assessed. So we went through this whole 3 or 4 month process with the ICA Group, just really looking at like, would it be realistic to transition? Would it meet my goals? Would it meet the employees' goals? How could it work? And so I guess what I'm adding this on to say that like this is a journey at which there are multiple times you can like get off the road if you want to, um, but that having a partner who really understands all the options and can really guide you on the decisions you need to make at each juncture is really helpful. You don't have to know all the answers up front if you've got the right partner.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because that way, it's not necessarily for everybody, but for the bodies it's for, it's really great. So we have a couple of questions from the participants. So I'm going to just read those out and each of you can address them. The first is, have you all considered organizational psychology in the transition to employee ownership or to being employee owned?
I answered that no, and I'm happy. I would love to learn more of what organizational psychology is. No, but whoever, I think the nice person who asked that question is Naomi Alexis. If you would share some resources, I'd love to learn more.
Yes, and shared also with ICA so we can share it with with our business owners going through the transition.
Yeah, we didn't go through any kind of formal process with that. I wish we had. I mean, again, I think if I could wave a magic wand and have ICA Group give us even more than they gave us in this process, one of the things I would want is really like ongoing coaching support for for everybody. You know, maybe in different combinations. But I think if you're exiting, you need a certain kind of support. If you're stepping into a new role, you need a different kind of support. So I think organizational psychology, theory, working with organizational psychologists, coaches, etc., would be invaluable, and I would definitely recommend it.
And how do you know when your business and employees are ready for employee ownership? That's also from the audience.
Michael, why don't you, do you want to jump in on
Yeah,
that?
I mean, we really worked for years on trying to prepare ourselves for employee ownership. So uh, I think people were very eager um, to step in and become owners of the company. We had some the big questions we had around how long should someone be there before they're eligible to be an owner? Is there a buy-in? Is there not a buy-in? We had some pretty big questions. Um, can we sell the company? Can we not sell the company? We had some previous agreements that were sort of handshake deals we had to sort of formalize. So there were some things we had to get through, but our team really wanted to do it from day one. They were committed to it day one. I would say, again, for transparency, over the years, some of those folks have left the company. So I think once it happens, it's not necessarily for everybody. Um, so then you should be prepared for that. That when it does happen, you're asking someone to step up and actually take on that responsibility of becoming an owner. They don't necessarily want to. We've considered, I'm not sure, Sarah, if you all have this, like if you don't become an owner, what happens? How long can you be at the company if you're not an owner? And we've talked about that, and I think we'll address that. We've also addressed things like maximum salaries, and that's something we're sort of in the process of talking about. At minimum salaries, we have a starting salary. I think most companies have starting salaries. Not many companies have, ending salaries. So what does that look like? I'm sort of fascinated by the Asian Japanese model rather than the American model of comparing the lowest paid worker in the company and the highest paid worker in the company, the ratio in between. What does that look like? And I think we as American owned businesses have to look deeper at that and not just you can go on forever. What is enough? When is enough enough? So there's some big questions that we wrestled with and we're still wrestling with that caused some timing issues. But in terms of the enthusiasm, people really wanted it. And it's we're small, and so I can't pretend that the experiment is working, can work anywhere. We want to scale. We want to prove the experiment can work at scale, so we can talk to our friends who are running bigger companies than ours and say, hey, maybe you should consider this. And so I think for all of you who are listening, like if you have 2 employees or 1 employee, we have about 25, and so we're hoping, for us at least, that we can get to a number of employees where we can show that the model can work in the long term for companies like ours. And Shelley, it does.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be able to have, with confidence, also say that by practice, not just by theory. And so part of our mission and part of our goal is to be successful so we can share our learnings with other people and encourage them to do what we did. So there's more worker-owned companies in this country because we really deeply believe in it.
Yeah. And I just want to pipe in on that question. Um, and I think Sarah talked about the process. We go through a process and first we do goal setting, and I say, but then the most important thing that we do is what we call a feasibility analysis. Like, is your business ready for employee ownership? And are your employees? And we're going to look at things like the operations, who can step in and do certain jobs if you should leave of your employees, or you're going to have to hire someone else. Even before that, we look at what's the relationship like between the owner and the employees. Is there trust? Is there transparency? Because a lack of trust means that it would be hard to do the deal because the employees may not, trust your papers or your financials, and that's essential. And by the way, are your papers in order? because they need to be. So those are the kinds of things that we look at. And what I would say is, whether it's ICA or one of the other founding partners who I mentioned, and there are some other organizations too, working with a co-op developer or an organization that helps to develop employee-owned businesses so they can take you through that feasibility analysis is probably one of the best ways to answer that question. And
I got
Michael's
one
hand
more
is
thing
up.
to say, Shelley. You're so humble. You go work with ICA. Okay, don't. I don't care. I don't. They are. You all have been so heaven sent, and angels to us as a company, and we are forever, ever indebted to your guidance, your wisdom, your encouragement. So I don't know anyone else, but I would not. If ICA is available to work with you all, they are just magnificent. So I just want to say.
Thank you so much. And Sarah, were you about to ask something else, or I'm going to go to another question that I have? Okay, so, and this is for the both of you as well. How did you roll out employee ownership in your companies? How did you inform your employees, and what was their reaction? You want to start, Sarah?
Sure. Yeah. And it sounds like we did this very differently. So, I think before I answer that question, I also want to underscore one of the great things about co-ops is that unlike ESOPs or some other models, you can really kind of, there are a lot of ways you can do it, a lot of ways you can design it, and that was really exciting. My perspective was that I didn't want to roll anything out broadly until it felt likely or clear. Like I didn't want people to get scared or get excited about something that might not happen. I wanted to make sure we were through it. So we started the feasibility and shared with just a few people on the leadership team that we were entering the feasibility stage, but asked them to keep it confidential. It wasn't until we got through the feasibility stage and felt it was likely we could do it, and I wanted to do it, that we rolled it out to the staff. And then we very much relied on ICA's guidance for how to do that. So ICA came to our staff meeting, talked about employee ownership, talked about co-ops, talked about the journey. There was a sort of an education process that we went through early on as we were setting it up. So I think we went public with the decision to move forward and become a co-op, or the goal of moving forward, probably in March of last year, and we closed on the deal in November. So it was probably about 8 months of the staff acclimating, learning, and then they had the option. Big Duck does have a buy-in. It's a very low buy-in, and it can be financed in a bunch of ways that makes it possible for anybody in the company to do it. And so people were given the option at the point of conversion to become employee owners or not.
Very good. We do have another question from a participant. How much more responsibility do employee owners need to take on? Does it change their job description significantly? Michael, I think it's your turn.
Great question. We do monthly meetings as owners. We actually had one today. So it's about an hour a month. And then there are responsibilities each person has as part of the ownership team. We compensate for ownership. So we give, I want to say 2 weeks of extra salary, if I'm not mistaken, to every owner of the company for that potential extra time that they have to put in as owners. So we do compensate based on a person's salary equally across the board, because there is some extra responsibility. And we also, like Sarah, we transitioned during COVID. People are tired, understandably so. So we also wanted to make sure that we were equitable in terms of people's time. But yeah, it's not a significant. We also have a leadership team. So I look at it, the way I describe it very easily is like I do a lot of nonprofit work. A board of directors of a nonprofit versus a leadership team or a management team of a nonprofit. So as a board of directors might meet quarterly, and sometimes we meet monthly. So I think of it, I sit in the board of directors. I have oversight, but my real day-to-day job is a member of the leadership team, which we also compensate for our leadership team. But So once you get to the leadership team, your hours are, more in terms of your time in the company, but we try hard to be respectful to people's time as owners.
Did you want to say anything to that question, Sarah?
I mean, Big Duck is less than a year into this process, and we're actually talking a lot about governance structures now. And one of the things we're talking about is I always think of this as the difference between working in the business or working on the business. And at Big Duck, there have always been a lot of people who worked on the business, not just in the business. We're now talking about this new layer as employee owners, as board members, because we have a board that sets policies that is voted on by the members. So we're talking about some of the things that Michael just talked about. He's further down the road. We're talking about things like what's the time commitment, how much compensation is required. And I mean, again, I think the co-op structure allows a lot of flexibility in that. You can design your own rules, and I think in Michael's description, what's clear is that the values of the company are guiding those decisions, and that those are the kinds of conversations we're having too. Here's my coworker.
I see. Mine has gone missing. I just adopted a new little kitty. She's 9 weeks old, and I walk the dog, and I can't find her since I came back. So she's around here somewhere. Okay, so we do have another question. I think that I'm probably going to answer this question. It's probably more of a developer question. And the question is, if you start with one employee, what advice can you give on the number of shares you should give away? And so just that you understand, with employee ownership, what a member gets in a co-op is a membership share. So all members get one share. So I think this question is probably about how much of the business you're thinking you should give away. And you should know that you can start a co-op without transferring 100% of the business to the co-op. So I would tell you that this is a more specialized approach, where there would probably need to be a plan to kind of grow the co-op. And it's like starting what they call a single man co-op. And I strongly suggest, like, reach out to us, and we can try to talk to you more about that. But that's more of a developer
Can
question.
I add one thing to that too? One thing
Yeah.
I didn't understand when I first started the company was I just did like sort of a cookie cutter template, S corp, corporation. I had a lawyer do it. They gave me 200 shares of the company, and that was what it was. So when we made the transition, we transitioned the 200 shares into the employee-owned business, and I retained one as a co-owner. As you said, everyone gets one share. We have outstanding shares, so we don't have 200 owners of the company. So the company still has outstanding shares that can be distributed to new owners. If we get above 200, obviously we'll have to add more shares and potentially dilute the shares we have now. But you don't have to give away every share of the company in the beginning. It's not like the 6 owners, therefore the 6 split the 200. The 6 owners, everybody gets one. There's 194 left. So I didn't understand that in the beginning. So we have shares in the bank, if you will, that can be distributed as we grow.
Yeah, that's a good. I'm glad you gave that example, because that kind of highlights the difference between like a typical shareholder company and a co-op, right? You get to have one voting share. So we have another question that I'm going to throw out at you that's from the audience. Many new worker co-ops struggle with trying to adopt new decision-making and governance models, such as non-hierarchical structures, consensus, sociocracy boards, and management versus circles. What changes has your business made, if any? What has worked or not worked for you? So I guess they're asking what decision-making model you're using, how it's different from what you used before when you were not employee owned, and what's working and not working. And Sarah, to the extent, I don't know how much you can answer. I know that we're actually working now with Big Duck
Yeah.
as a co-op on this
Yeah,
very
I mean,
thing.
I'll be curious to hear what Michael says about this, because again, Big Duck is, a year and a few months behind Michael's business in this transition. And actually, this question makes me think of that earlier question you asked about what would you do to prepare. I think that one of the challenges that, not challenges, but one of the things that's been a lot in this first year of transition for the Big Duck team is that when I was the owner of the company, even though we had very democratic processes for planning or the work we did, et cetera, ultimately the policies and practices that we had were policies and practices that were largely set by me or approved by me or something like that. And so there is this opportunity when you become a co-op to really start from scratch again, revision your business, remission your business, redetermine your values, determine the decision-making structures. And I think one of the challenges in the first year for us, and I think for other people, is that you're flying the plane already and you kind of have to rebuild it while you're in it. And that takes time. So I think that it is it's hard to take the time and the space to question and challenge and rethink all of those practices while you're actually doing the work. So I don't know that I have a good answer to that question because I think it's just too early at Big Duck. I think we're still figuring out what is still hierarchical, what is not hierarchical, how do these practices work. But to go back to the question about prep, I do think that part of the prep is to either really carve out the time and space maybe to do that, um, or to just establish clear expectations and patience that it is going to take time to decide which practices from the legacy business still work in the co-op and which practices need to be challenged. But I'm curious, Michael, what you think because you're further down the road.
Yeah, that's great insight. I'll have the trade notes with you at some point. Um, we we began the company with a consensus building decision making model. Um, I think it'd be really helpful in any company to really understand how to build consensus. It is not just sitting in a room and no one leaving until
Mhm.
until your unanimous decision. Like nonviolent communication, really, really critical in consensus building. Um, and we didn't really take that too seriously in the beginning because we were young, right? We were young and it was like, whatever, like you make a joke and someone doesn't laugh and realize it wasn't that funny a day later and it might have been a little violent
Mhm.
in the way you're communicating or raising your voice or getting angry at something and not reconciling that. And so that led to really challenges in like how do we build consensus. Um, so I think when one person is in power, there's a lot of violent communication oftentimes in companies because that person says my way or thy way, or if you don't like it, you can leave. Right? All these like things that we've heard. I'm like saying this shit like I've heard it. Right? I didn't write it down. I'm just like it's ingrained in my brain. I've heard it so many times. And so how do you really build consensus? I think is certainly a great continuing exercise. The other piece, because we work with a lot of younger staff, is like what does all this stuff mean? Like, and because if you don't have any context, you don't know that most businesses are built with mediocre leaders, right? Like you think
Mhm.
like, oh, if you own a company, you're really smart, or if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500, you got to be really, really great at what you do. And then you start to realize, like, well, maybe they're not. Maybe they got there because of something else, right? And so when building out new structures or looking at new models, like why are we challenging those systems or previous models in our own companies, being very transparent about that. And then I'd say like we're constantly learning and reading. I would say, Shelley, for direct communication, I think one of the challenges that we find is that there isn't enough literature available, and the literature that comes out is sort of from the elitist, I don't want to name them, but the elitist publications or the economic elitist groups. They're like, oh, there's a new thing happening called worker-owned cooperatives. You should 5 steps to become a worker-owned cooperative. It's like, wait a second, this isn't new.
Hmm.
First of
Hmm.
all, it's not new. Globally, it's been happening for a very long time. And there are some people who are really smart at this and know what they're doing, and not it's not a fad. It's not a reaction to 2020. It's
Hmm.
not just because we have to, create more equity. Like, this is an ongoing movement that has a lot of smart people who have been doing this for a long time, including many of you at ICA. And so that's why I'm such an advocate for ICA, because you do have so much wisdom. It is not not a new pop-up that is catching on to a fad. So I do think, like, surrounding yourselves with people who just have the wisdom and not we need more literature, and we need more um, public. And so for us, we're not there yet, but we dream of open sourcing all of our process, good and bad, to the world at some point, white labeling everything and saying, here's our manuals, here's our employee manuals, here's a decision-making process, and you take it and use it. And the last thing I'd say is, one thing you all helped us with really greatly was who makes the decisions based on ownership and leadership. And that was really, really helpful. And so also just being clear on who owns the decision. Is it ownership? Or because sometimes it's a little gray. Like as example, right now we're struggling, right, with keeping our office open. We have an office in Brooklyn, and having a return to work policy, instead of who owns that decision, and who can make that decision. And we're having a really hard time, right, making that decision, because the owners think one way, the leadership team thinks another way, the managing directors think another way, the employees, workers don't think another way. And so I think it's helpful to have as much clarity as you possibly can on what decisions are made and who can make those decisions.
Okay. And we have another question from our participants. How do and I'm sorry, Sarah, you can, if you wanted to say anything else on that last point, feel free. Um, but we're down to the last 6 minutes. I want to get these questions in. How do employees in a co-op react to having a small group of people, in parentheses, managers, in charge when they are also owners of the business?
So I don't want to and shouldn't speak for the people who, worked in the company and are now employee owners about how they feel. But I think this goes back to what Michael was just talking about coming up with decision-making structures. And this is the next piece of work that we're going to be doing with ICA also. So Michael, I'm glad to hear you did some work on this and it was useful. That's part of what Big Duck is embarking on. I mean, I think I think that one of the greatest things about the co-op model is that it is flexible. You can structure things, there is no manual. And that's also, so that's great as an opportunity and extremely challenging, because you have to really figure out what is right for your company based on the values, the cooperative values that people share. Um, but I guess I want to emphasize that, as Michael talked about earlier, his company is still a for-profit. Big Duck is still a for-profit. These are capitalist businesses existing in a capitalist structure, and perhaps trying to challenge a lot of those norms and rethink them in better and more creative ways. But there is still hierarchy, there is still management, there are still some of the trappings of traditional capitalist for-profit businesses. Again, could they be challenged? Could they be rethought? I'm sure they could, but you have to figure out, I think this is part of the work we hope to do. How do you continue to be profitable and successful and make sure that the financial gains of the company are getting transferred to the owners, and at the same time challenge norms that feel like they're not equitable?
Yeah. And just as a point of clarification, so typically in the capitalist structure, right? So those who control the capital and give the capital often get to control everything, right? Those are the stakeholders. Whereas in an employee-owned business, labor, right? The workers are kind of controlling, because they have the democracy we spoke of earlier, right? One share, one vote. And so that is like this alteration to whatever the traditional capital in terms of impacting and coming up with a new way of doing things. So I'm going to give like a wrap up question. Oh, but I do want to mention, because I think we're assuming sometimes, um, we call it patronage, but as Sarah noted, that these are profit making businesses, that basically at the end of the year, the worker owners will vote to decide what they want to do with the profit of the business that year. Do they want to share the patronage, and there's a formula that they'll all use to develop on how, or do they want to reinvest it all in the company, or do they want to do some split? And the other thing I want to mention is that it is possible to run the co-op just like it ran the day before it became a co-op, because there are different decisions for everyday operations as opposed to policy, as opposed to these other broader decisions, what a board or the worker owners would make. So that goes to that last question. And now this is the last question for us. I'm going to try to squeeze two together. This is for you both. If what advice would you give to business owners who may be wondering if EO can work for their business? And I'd like to tack on to that during your transition. What, if anything, surprised you most? So, what advice and what, if anything, surprised you most? You want to start,
So
Sarah?
my answer is my advice is talk to ICA Group, talk to their partners, talk to experts in this process, and those conversations will really help you get a sense of if this is a good path forward for you. And what surprised me most in the process was how, as we got into the weeds of the conversion process and we were actually like negotiating all the legal documents and things like that, how for me as an exiting owner, I actually really had to separate myself. It sort of felt in some ways that even though I was very, and still am very invested in those people and their success as a co-op, I also had to divest and give them space to negotiate against me and think about this separately from me. And so that was, I think, very healthy for everybody, but challenging when you're used to being one team to start to uncouple from that team.
And Michael, what would your advice
Yeah,
be?
briefly, I left my email. We are a small but mighty growing movement. And I think mutuality, shared resources, shared knowledge. I'm happy to share offline if anyone wants to email me. I saw someone send me a LinkedIn. Thank you. So I want to be a resource. I want to learn from you all, and certainly anything I can offer. What surprised me is that there is a community, and there is a strong community. And when I saw Big Duck, I was like, yes. I was so happy because I've watched Big Duck. I'm like, they're cool. And now the worker owned, I'm like, yes, it's another one that is joining the team. So the more we can build, I think the more good we can do with each other, and not just with our clients or our business or our profit margins, but with each other. And really just, I'm happy we're doing this. I want to do more of this. But please, like my email comes to me, I read them, I respond to them myself. I would love to help whenever I can.
Thank you so much. Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. We hope you learned something new about employee ownership and can see the many benefits of the business model. EO can truly improve your business, the lives of your employees, and your community. If you are interested in learning more about EO, please visit employeeownershipequals.org. You'll find information on the different types of EO. You can read case studies from other businesses like Big Meister, another one that ICA helped to develop. And you can even sign up to speak with an EO expert. ICA's link is also there, icagroup.org. And we have many resources also listed on the ICA website. So thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.